Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's virtual connector session, Future Laboratories, Spaces for Convergence and Collaboration. My name is Galen Tobin Vanden Heuvel, Executive Director of Western Research Parks, and I'm delighted to have you join us online today. Our connector sessions are designed to bring together experts, innovators, and entrepreneurs to spark collaboration and share insights. We are proud to co-host these sessions with the London Economic Development Corp, LEDC, fostering connections across our community. So today we're excited to explore the evolving design of research labs and their role in fostering adaptability and innovation. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge that Western Research Parks is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lipinawek, and the Chinandran nations, and we honor their connection to this land and their ongoing stewardship, which guides and inspires our work every day. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Somayeh Mousazadeh. And we're so very fortunate to have her here. She is the design director at HDR. And just for your own information, HDR is actually a 100% employee-owned global professional services firm specializing in architecture, engineering, environmental, and construction services. And so Somayeh specializes in creating spaces that support collaboration, adaptability, and innovation. Her insights today will provide a valuable look at the trends shaping research labs for the next generation. Please join me in welcoming Somayeh, and I'll pass it over to you, Somayeh, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for your kind words. It's an honor to be here today. It's unfortunate that I couldn't be there in person, but I'm really looking forward to participate in one of your future sessions in person. So today I'll talk about sort of future laboratories as spaces for convergence and scientific collaboration. I talk about some of the concepts, and at the end there is a 10 minutes video that kind of summarizes and sort of expand on some of the notions. And then I think I left enough time for sort of more in-depth conversation at the end. I really look forward to hear your comments and feedbacks and question and kind of talk through some of these concepts that it's really a result of a research that we started 2 years ago at HDR. Post-pandemic, we were interested in the sort of this trend and evolution that was happening in science, the integration of AI and biology specifically, but also we are witnessing that a lot of different disciplines are coming to the mix, and really the boundaries between all these disciplines are blurring. And we were very curious to understand what it means then now for laboratories that are really the vehicle for for the science, how they will be impacted by all of these disciplines coming under one building, one umbrella. What would be some of the spatial and infrastructure needs that need to be accommodated? So to do this research, we actually did use a unusual methodology. We collaborated with 5 different institutions across the US, which are sort of leading in this form of research. We did a sort of series of different engagement with them, and the entire research was sort of peer reviewed, and sort of we had an ethics approval to do this research. So what we did, we sort of some scientists in this collaborating institutions volunteered and were interested to work with us on this research. So we invited them to fill out some surveys, and then we went to their space. We did in-person interviews with them after spending time and do shadow studies in their space, really trying to understand how they engage with the space, what are some of the bits and pieces in the labs and infrastructure that was working with them, and what was basically hindering their collaboration and their scientific work. Bioconvergence is about really applying engineering principles to solve biological and medical problems. But as you can imagine, engineering solution, they have a limit, and all of those principles do not always apply to nature. But now, specifically post-Human Genome Project, we are at an interesting point where we know enough about how nature builds to leverage biological principles for developing new engineering innovations that can solve the great challenges of our time. Pandemic and sort of vaccine was definitely a good example of that. So these new engineering solutions inspired by nature are called bio-inspired technology. But the question is, how did this sort of evolution in science happen? So there is an incredible thing is going on in science, and it's really interesting for us, even outside the science, to witness that. And that is the convergence of life sciences, physical sciences, data science, and engineering. And this integration, as I'm sure perhaps if there are scientists in the audience know, this integration enables them to precisely manipulate anything from cells, molecules to genes and atoms in developing new bio-inspired technologies. So really their toolbox has incredibly expanded to coming up with solutions that perhaps were not possible before. So this is what they call biodigital convergence, or simply bioconvergence. And what unlocked this disruptive science is the close collaboration across multiple disciplines. But you may ask why us, the architects, pay attention to this, and how does it impact what we do? So the real transforming idea in bioconvergence is the sort of this keyword convergence itself. And that's what it changes sort of the laboratories and how we design them. We are also used to seeing disciplinary buildings, perhaps in research parks or research environments on universities. It's very typical to see a physics building, biology building, chemistry, and so on and so forth. And interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research has been a trend for some time now. So when scientists from all these different sort of departments come together to work on a specific topic or a specific project, but typically those collaborations are focused on those projects and are not necessarily long term. But when we talk about convergence, it's different than multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. And one important difference is that typically industry is involved to really commercialize the findings in the research, and typically in the industry, when research happens, those research are not high risk, but they are translational. And on the other hand, on university campuses or more academic environments, when they do research, the research are high risk, but a lot of times they don't translate into a solution in the real world environment. So basically, the convergence research are bringing these two together in a sense is high-risk technology translation that is happening in academia with the sort of involvement and support of the industry. And the real sort of perhaps difference with multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary form of research is that the scientists actually start from a real world problem and the scientific discovery happens along the way. And for folks who are interested, who know this Wyss Institute at Harvard, that's a really good example for a convergence institution and how sort of they work together for a real translational research application there. But as I'm sure the scientists sort of agree with me on this, doing transdisciplinary research is not without its challenges. A lot of scientists also are not used to working in this manner. So convergence really requires catalysts for it to happen. So this diagram on the screen, this is based on our surveys with the scientists. So when we ask them about, okay, what really needs to happen for this form of transdisciplinary collaboration, they sort of identified multiple elements that we organize them and categorize them under the three categories that you see on the right on the screen. So convergence needs a very specific organizational structure, a culture that promotes collaboration, and a space kind of embodies that all. So a space for us, a lot of times when we are working with clients on designing a new laboratories, everyone is so focused on the space, and that kind of drives the decisions. And at the end, the institution and the users try to fit themselves in the space. But if we want to design facilities for really embodying collaboration and specifically convergence of multiple disciplines, which can be quite challenging, we need to actually start from the institution, the vision for the institution, the organizational structure, and a very specific culture. Then the space can be designed to facilitate all those other elements. So the alignment of these three things is what we call the secret sauce that is basically the framework for convergence. Some of you might be familiar with Salk Institute. In California. So the building, it's a historic example of, I think, the embodiment of the three elements that I talked about. So the Jonas Salk, who invented polio vaccine, famously said that his contribution to building the institution that was designed by Louis Kahn, the architect, was more important than his invention of the polio vaccine. And the way the two work together is amazing because Jonas Salk had a very specific vision of how a scientific environment should work to really drive new discoveries. This was right after his invention of the polio vaccine. And then he was working closely with the architect to make sure that his vision and his idea of the institution and how it should be run, also the specific culture that he wanted to institute, was translated into the space. So the space became really a true vehicle to realize or embody the institution. This is based again on the scientists' feedback on priorities for convergence facilities. So from their feedback, it's designing convergence facilities is really for us about dealing with unknown and flexibility because it's hard to predict science and where it's going. Also, as well as creating a sense of collaboration and collegiality in the space. And we explored these ideas in a prototype. So, the prototype for the convergence facility is like a loft-like structure. So the building systems are decoupled from the structure and are accessible for maintenance and upgrades as needed, like basically a chassis for cars that you can take pieces apart and upgrade and update the systems. This was true mostly for old cars, not the new ones, of course. But basically, the idea here is that a lot of times when we talk about flexibility, we discuss movable walls or ceiling elements, or movable furniture or casework in the labs, which are all necessary to make it flexible, but they are not enough. So we think the sort of real element that plays an important role in the flexibility of lab is actually the building system and infrastructure. They need to be accessible so that they can be upgraded as the science needs change over time. So this is just an anecdote that I wanted to share from one of the facilities that I actually visited last year. So this facility was just opened a year before my visit. And already they were running out of space and capacity in their mechanical system to cool down the sort of many number of -80 freezers that they had in the space. So, and the scientists were telling us that they never anticipated how many freezers they would need. Sort of really their focus in their science changed. And they were doing a lot more cell culture work for those who are familiar with that research. So basically, and they were kind of locked in this space that couldn't accommodate their research anymore. So in a facility like this, labs and offices are arranged to also maximize exposure and collision between the different disciplines, but without interrupting their focus. Physical collaborative spaces equipped with technology need to be strategically located in the building to facilitate knowledge exchange, which is basically the core of the convergence idea. And in a nutshell, convergence facility should be designed and function essentially like a dynamic living body, and that's what makes it adaptable and flexible. So this is perhaps more of an architectural drawing, but what I want to say about this is that think of like a chef-made meal versus perhaps a burger that you buy from McDonald's. Like for a burger, the fast food burger, all the bits and pieces come from different places. Some person prepares the bread and other person prepares the beef patty, and then someone else at the store kind of puts it all together. So, and all of those bits and pieces and people who prepare it, they are kind of alienated from each other. Well, when we talk about designing laboratories, our design process a lot of times is also the same. So the architect designed the space, the planners kind of figure out where all these program elements need to go, and then the engineers kind of figure out, okay, this is a mechanical system, and kind of they try to fit it in the structure. But basically what we are promoting here is that a more integrated and holistic approach to tightly and nicely fit all of these elements together to basically be able to accommodate the convergence research, which is when it comes to space and infrastructure, can be very complicated because all the disciplines that are coming into these facilities have competing needs, and they typically, their facilities typically are designed specifically to their needs. So as I mentioned, some of the barriers, there are many barriers to transdisciplinary research. So we, which sort of this specific question from the scientist helps us to identify some of the design gaps that we need to address when we design convergence facilities. So there are 10 elements that we found are key in the success of convergence facilities. I already addressed a couple of them. And in the sort of research, we develop a specific design strategies for each of these. I want to specifically expand on one of them that was on a couple of them here that was based on the on our observations in the spaces, and then when I play the video, it will more expand on some other elements. So one of the most interesting observation for me going to the lab was noticing how now most of the equipment that go into the lab actually are producing digital information. Even the equipment that used to be analog, like all the microscopes, now produce this high resolution images. So it's like an explosion of data, in a sense, in the labs. And then on the other hand, we see that a lot of research is moving towards single cell and omics and those kind of sort of research, which produces a lot of physical samples. And both when you think about commercialization of the research, and also when the scientists are doing publications, they have to keep these samples for a long time. So both the sort of data and the physical samples provide sort of an opportunity for collaboration and research, but because there is no central way to catalog and archive these information, it's essentially becomes inaccessible to everyone to use. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the sort of the physical requirement for both of these. So I'm sure many of you are in the labs where you keep needing more -80 freezers to store all these physical samples from your research. And on the other hand, a lot of institutions, for new requirement around data security, needs to have their own specific data racks. And this also is another burden on the space and infrastructure. And ironically, both of these two elements, in terms of infrastructure, they need sort of similar requirements, which is cooling the environment. So one of the sort of solutions that came out of our conversation with the scientists was, and they were supporting the idea of basically, as part of the core elements of the research facilities, now it makes sense to have a central space, also a management system, a central space to both store the physical samples, perhaps like a central freezer farm, and also servers for data, and a data management system that connects the two together. So this is also another example of, this is typically what the sort of in a scope that architects don't need to get involved, or historically sort of was not part of what we do. But as we understand the sort of complexity of the new labs and the requirements. Basically, this is part of understanding the institution and all the bits and pieces and processes that goes into to doing the research. So it's kind of expanding also our role into both understanding the physical space, but also the virtual space and the overlap of these two to make it work. So I'm gonna play the video. Hopefully you can hear it. If there is any issue, let me.
Remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic fundamentally changed our perception of work environments. As we embraced more hybrid and remote working options, many began questioning the relevance of physical workspaces altogether. But does this apply to everyone? Counter to this perception, some are putting even more consideration and emphasis on their physical workspaces.
Things are just like physically spread out, so it'd be nice to have everything co-located. I mean, this building is old and needs a ton of work. Like, we have leaking pipes, we have like poor HVAC and environmental control in most of the rooms. The air circulation needs work.
So proximity helps, like physical proximity helps for sure.
For scientists, well-designed laboratories are fundamental to solving some of the biggest challenges of our time. New research buildings are emerging to support the recent convergence trends for tackling scientific and societal challenges that overlap with multiple fields. These cutting-edge research spaces are called Convergence Facilities. But what is convergence?
I would say it's a new trend. People are really beginning to see that all these different disciplines really can't be so separated from each other.
There's a convergence on biology as potential solutions to problems that we have in research and academia.
She's a chemist, but she's, there's biology involved with her chemistry. I think they're doing nanoparticle work as well.
But there's basically no departments there, and everyone sort of interacts pretty seamlessly.
There's an incredibly exciting thing going on that many of you may not be aware of, which is essentially the convergence of the life sciences with engineering and the physical sciences. We could literally manipulate an atom, a gene, a molecule, a cell, one at a time. And as a result, the boundaries between living and non-living systems are literally beginning to break down.
This may sound like science fiction, but convergence is already happening. Take the rapid development of COVID-19 mRNA vaccines as an example. It was because of unprecedented collaboration between multiple disciplines, including biology, chemistry, informatics, nanotechnology, epidemiology, and more. To enable the scientific breakthroughs of the future, we need new institutions that are structured to promote transdisciplinary collaboration and research buildings that are designed to break down silos, in opposition to the hyper-focused labs of the past.
My opinion is the minds have to change. The culture has to change.
Different disciplines really can't be so separated from each other.
I see more of my colleagues at international conferences than I do see them here in the building.
The idea of making a research institute for scientific collaboration as a response to addressing challenging humanity problems first came about after the polio epidemic in the 50s with building the Salk Institute. Jonas Salk, who discovered the first polio vaccine, said that his most important contribution to humanity was actually the Salk Institute and its research facility, not inventing the vaccine. Salk worked closely with Louis Kahn, a mastermind in architecture, to design the Salk Institute as a collaborative place where scientists could explore the basic principles of life and realize the broader implications of their discoveries for the benefit of our world. The timeless architecture of the Salk Institute and building, together, has contributed to its reputation as one of the most prestigious and successful scientific institutions in the world, and it continues to inspire those who design modern-day scientific spaces. At HDR, architect Somayeh Mousazadeh and a team of experts have been looking into the great science architecture of the past for designing labs of the future.
We just completed a year-long research on emerging convergence facilities as a new typology in science architecture. The voices that you've been hearing are from our interviews with the scientists in leading research institutions across the US, speaking to some of their space and infrastructure challenges and their barriers to collaboration. Many research buildings become obsolete because their systems are actually buried in a structure and cannot be feasibly upgraded as the science needs evolve in time.
The fact that Salk Institute has passed the test of time proves that it is adaptable. Similarly, flexibility is an important element in the Convergence facilities. Each discipline coming to the Convergence facility has its own specific needs.
One obvious design challenge for us is how to logistically accommodate sometimes competing needs of each discipline without isolating them on different floors and creating islands or silos within one building. And even a more pressing question is how to design research spaces, or indeed any spaces, to naturally foster collaboration and encourage the exchange of knowledge.
Sometimes collaboration comes about in strange ways. Take MIT's Banana Lounge, for example. In order to increase interactions among different disciplines on campus, MIT students came up with the idea to keep a room well stocked with bananas available to any student at any time.
I think what is genius about the Banana Lounge is that the students discovered that people need an alibi for interaction and collaboration, and in this case, it is the banana. Architecturally speaking, the room is just a room with some windows, and the alibi gives it a meaning that everyone relates to and brings them together. Interaction and collaboration are just the byproducts of this setup.
When we think about designing spaces for collaboration, it's important to think about reasons that naturally draw people together. Perhaps not surprisingly, for scientists, sharing tools and research equipment is an alibi for collaboration. One of the challenges in multidisciplinary facilities is keeping pace with the rapid development of new technology and research equipment. It's tough for individual labs or principal investigators to stay up to date.
So it'd be very nice to have like a centralized set of centrifuges for the whole floor that are under like one service contract, well-maintained, taken care of.
You know, if you don't have some sort of thing to like break people out of the lab, I have to drag them out of the lab.
The more we know about something, the more we need tools to make sense of what we know. And oftentimes, like, tools will be borrowed.
Sharing research equipment not only promotes collaboration, but also it makes the financing and maintenance much more feasible. It also makes it easier to train the scientists to use the new equipment and stay up to date. Investing in a state-of-the-art shared core facility is a growing trend, and especially in convergence facilities where science needs evolve so rapidly. There are still dedicated labs and equipment, but also a shared component that is central to the idea of convergence.
Staying up to date with the fast pace of technology and science evolution is necessary in convergence facilities, but it's not without its challenges.
It's very difficult to feasibly anticipate and accommodate future needs. Often there is a 3 to 5 year gap between when a research facility is designed to when it's built and occupied, and that is enough time for science needs to change and make the design assumptions obsolete. If you think about chassis for cars, they are frames that allow everything inside them to change without impacting the overall integrity of the whole.
Convergence facilities are loft-like structures that accommodate the integration of multiple disciplines under one umbrella. Building systems are decoupled from the structure and are accessible for maintenance and upgrades as needed.
It is like designing the building as a living body that can regenerate itself over time.
Spaces are arranged to maximize exposure and collision between the different disciplines, but without interrupting their focus. Events in different scales and formats, from intimate workshops to larger symposiums, are organized to facilitate formal knowledge exchange. For informal knowledge exchange, a range of physical collaborative spaces and virtual tools are strategically infused in the building. And of course, the impact of data, AI, and digital tools has to be taken into account.
For them to even house that data, they all of a sudden have to like stand up a whole bunch of extra security infrastructure that like is not their like wheelhouse.
I've seen an exponential explosions in the possibilities to produce data and reliable outcomes.
The need to accommodate big data and computation power as a piece of infrastructure in labs is a new but growing demand.
Traditionally, we only involve the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers in the design team called the MEP team. Given the growing significance and complexity of data as a critical infrastructure component, it has become essential to include a data expert in the design team as well. Their role would be to evaluate data needs, identify relevant data security and storage strategies, and design the data infrastructure. And we refer to the expanded team as MEP plus D.
Beginning to uncover nature's design principles, and that now the future will be actually looking to biology to develop new engineering solutions.
For architects, the most important lesson to learn from nature is perhaps the ability to adapt and regenerate. In an era where scientific needs evolve rapidly, we cannot afford to build rigid, isolated laboratories that become obsolete. Designing future structures as dynamic and flexible living systems based on values of collegiality and responsibility is both a sustainable and natural way to move forward.
Thank you for watching that. So I think we can now, if there are any questions or feedback, shared experiences or anecdotes that anyone wants to share.
Thank you, Somayeh. Maybe we'll get you to not share your screen and we can have sort of an interaction between ourselves. I do have a question to jumpstart the system. Sustainability, long-term goals, all these things combined. So what advice would you give to an organization planning to upgrade or build new research facilities to ensure they remain relevant for the next, say, 20 years?
So just maybe quick note on sustainability. A lot of times we thought, accommodating or sustainability or reducing the energy use and footprint is about doing more initial investment. And that is always, I know budget on the projects is sort of always a concern. And a lot of times that becomes sort of something that is prohibitive. But basically, some of the things that we have experienced recently and was a result of really working collaboratively and on our end also in a transdisciplinary manner with the engineers and planners was coming up with ideas that actually going for a more sustainable green lab means less initial infrastructure, less initial investment, which is basically is good and compatible with the short-term investment goals, but also reducing the operational costs in the long term. I just give you an example of what I mean by that. So, labs are typically sort of intensive and demanding in terms of ventilation and air exchange rate in the labs, which drives sort of cost of, mechanical system and a lot of air handling units and whatnot, which is typically 40% of the actually construction costs for laboratories. So we adopted an approach that we call it risk-based zoning, which is compatible with the trend in science, the use of fume hoods and those demanding equipment has sort of really is minimized recently with more with the new equipment and automation, also more emphasis on research like cell culture and less use of chemicals generally in the labs. So the way we plan the labs is that those intensive functions go in enclosed rooms, so that lets us to, increase the ventilation in those rooms and free up the rest of the sort of space to use a more sort of normal lower air exchange in the lab. So that has helped us to really rethink the way we design the mechanical system for the labs, with addition of some controls and just more coordination between planning and sort of mechanical disciplines. And that has sort of drove the initial investment cost down, and also drove the energy, the footprint, environmental footprints of the labs down. So really, I think opting for a more holistic approach towards planning and design of laboratories is essential to be able to achieve the sustainability goals. Otherwise, I think it's natural that it becomes kind of impossible and a competing sort of goal.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question in the chat. It's, Dr. AKM, hi. Is any organization providing services for new lab facilities? And he also mentions that they're interested in a convergence research lab by integrating with green chemistry lab and green synthesis. So I guess your question, Somayeh, would be, is there any organization providing services for new lab facilities?
At HDR, sort of one of our, we specialize in designing laboratories in general, but recently we also sort of with this research, and also like it was really a work of an expanded team. We sort of looked into multiple examples of convergence facilities. So we can definitely help with initial thinking, which that's where we actually would prefer to be involved when sort of the initial thinking about designing a new space is starting to shape basically the idea of the institution, because I think that's when we actually can bring value then for the space to accommodate all of that, as I mentioned in the presentation. So so if there Dr. Hai, we would be happy to have a conversation about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Sarah will be sharing, the recording later. And so if anybody wants to make a connection with anybody and you can't seem to do that, please contact Sarah. And Dr. Hai says, thank you. So I have a question, just general out there. So we all know that there's this theme out there that there is a lack of wet lab space. There's a lack of lab space in general. And whether or not that remains to be true, there's always changing markets and things that happen on a daily basis that affect that. Somayeh, in your travels, in your research, do you find that to be the case? And how has that, more importantly, from your perspective, how has that affected your design role? Because usually when there's a lack or scarcity of space, people move into any facility and then retrofit it. So how, can you comment on that or give us some insight into your experience with that?
I totally recognize the sort of lack of wet lab space, but also a lot of times there is a space, but as I mentioned, the infrastructure and the space is not really accommodating, the new science or the evolution of the science, and that becomes the problem. And a lot of times, the way those buildings are designed, it's really difficult and impossible to do any retrofit in a space, that already is operational, because all of those systems are embedded in the ceilings, walls, so really requires demolition and takes time. And other problem that I see in the same vein is that there is always a lag from when we design for labs. So the design process, and construction takes any time between like, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, depending on the scale of the projects. And some of those initial sort of assumptions also become obsolete even on the new projects by the time, the users occupy the space. And like I literally saw in the labs, like they bought equipment specifically for genome processing, that were new when they bought it, when the building was, being designed. And by the time it was finished, there was already new equipment, much cheaper, was available. So they had both, and the old one was just sitting there and not working. So it's really comes down to changing our mindset. Like I can speak only, from the vantage point of an architect who is really interested in sort of working in the science architecture. For me, it's about thinking about the space really differently, about designing the infrastructure such that it works with there is a sort of clear delineation between the infrastructure and the structure, and it always stay accessible, for upgrades as needed, because the scientific needs, so they change much more rapidly than how and the way we design the buildings. So that is the key point to me. One example, right now we are designing a research building actually in Ottawa. So for this project, we really are embracing this. So the way we are designing the mechanical room is that actually there is a sequence, and the way the mechanical room works, that they can even bring new air handling units, and the way the shafts work, they can always bring new lines to the labs, both pipes, chases, and so the design really is not just about designing the building exterior or nice, meeting rooms or office spaces. It's really about understanding the infrastructure and solving the puzzle and challenge of how we can always keep it accessible for future upgrade and accommodating the science. This is also an approach, our approach when we are looking at retrofit projects. So really kind of stripping down the building and kind of rethinking it, where are the paths to bring the infrastructure to the spaces? How can it, again, stay accessible so that it can be maintained properly?
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have a question that come from somebody else, and there's been interest in the chat about it. Somebody else has chimed in. Can you please comment on different financing models, such as public-private, for building capital-intensive convergence center and getting strategic tenants? Is there government support for such?
Is there government support?
Well, that was just a carry-on question, but I think the main thing is that, the person posing the question wants you to comment on financing models, public-private, for building these centers. And maybe we can wrap this around, there's a lot of models out there, I'm sure, but in your experience, what are some of the successful ones, and where do they sit? If you could give us some ideas that we could go in and view these online or otherwise. But yeah, financing models.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I answer your question the way I understand it, and let me know if I understood it correctly. If you're referring to, for example, different contracting models for building labs.
I think what he's talking about is the finance model. So usually what happens is, and I'll give you an example. So in our park, we have we own our own buildings. We just go out, we'd pay for the lab to be retrofitted, then we'd rent out the space. That's our Western Research Parks model. At other research parks, what they may do is they may get a developer to throw up a building, And so the developer would fund the building, but the university may have to commit to a certain percentage of occupancy, for example. In another model, it might be a not-for-profit opening it and getting some government funding. So I think that's the road they're going. And maybe you don't focus on that, and that's okay, but I think that's what the question is gearing towards, is do we have different financing models? And if that doesn't fit within your wheelhouse, Somayeh, we can do some research on that and get back to the participant.
Yeah, this is really not the sort of not my focus, but my only sort of overlap with this sort of question is one thing. As far as I know, the doing transdisciplinary research and convergence is really a priority. Both in Canada and US, like in US, a lot of NIH sort of grants for building new facilities, if we are talking about government support, goes into these type of research. So it's really, that's sort of part of the reason that this trend is sort of becoming recognized. So there are many buildings or parts of the buildings that are supported by the government in terms of building the space because of this specific research. And then the other things that are important in this type of truly convergence research is the ability to commercialize, and sort of the research needs to be really reliable. So the infrastructure then for that becomes really important, is part of the game to provide quality research. So that's basically, that's the limit of my understanding and overlap, which there are a lot of government support for facilities like this if they are prioritizing convergence research. At York University, the project that we are doing is actually a sort of convergence of kinesiology and neuroscience together in one building, and that's a CFI grant, basically, that is sort of subsidizing the building of the neuroscience labs in that facility that we are working on. Our other project, great. Also in Ottawa, it's sort of a portion of the building is with the CFI grant.
Right. And the other things I'd like to comment on too is the most recent, what would I call them, things that are progressing as they adjust to market demand. So we have Spec Labs in Mississauga, we have the Spin Up Incubator of University of Toronto, AMRC in Ottawa, University of Waterloo, 90,000 square foot health facility, and then McMaster Innovation Park as well. So all of those that I just mentioned are different models. And, I'll give you an example. FedDev has invested $5 million in Spec Labs, and that's a not-for-profit organization. So there's your funding models in a way. Spin Up is a joint venture between UTM and City of Mississauga. And then, Waterloo has a different set up there as well, and then McMaster. So I think everything that we do in terms of producing wet lab space has different financial models and different models depending on the university, depending on the brokers that are involved or the developers. But then putting all of your much needed convergence in there, Somayeh, is where your expertise lies. So that's great. And thank you for those insights. That's wonderful.
Yes.
I don't see any other questions in the queue. But I would like to say this has been very insightful as somebody who runs a research park, and that we have our staff on here, and we find that all those little things, your banana model, it's the cafe here that makes it work. It's the sessions like this, it's the speaker sessions. So we'd like to thank you for your insightful keynote. And we'd also like to, welcome our audience to contact us about questions around this. So Your vision's great for spaces, especially as it comes to fostering collaboration and adaptability. And so we appreciate your time and your knowledge on this, and the video that you were a big part in creating was absolutely amazing. So thank you for that today. We'd also like to thank our participants for joining today's connector session. It's the engagement that makes it worthwhile. So we're looking forward to other connector sessions, and until then, I would say take care, and we appreciate your participation, and thank you all so very much, and especially to Somayeh for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Much appreciated. Take care.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.